Well, hello everyone, and welcome to our Nurses Wellness Roundtable broadcast. I'm your host, Syl Up. I'm the Assistant Chief Nursing Officer at Providence. As a reminder, the information provided during this event is for information purposes only. So if you have any medical questions, please reach out to your primary care or healthcare professional. So let's begin. I'm really excited today that I am joined by Chandria Dyer. She is a registered nurse for Providence. Welcome, Chandria.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for agreeing to spend this time with us today. I'm really excited about that. Why don't we just dive right in? Tell us a little bit about yourself. What led you into the nursing profession, and when did you know you wanted to be a nurse? Anything in particular that sparked that interest for you?
Yeah, so I've been a nurse for 21 years. I actually went to college to become a teacher,
Okay.
and I went away to Santa Cruz, and that was my plan. But I ended up getting a job being a nanny to a nurse who worked the night shift. And so while she was at work and her husband worked night shift elsewhere, I would find myself reading through her books, her anatomy books, her physiology books. And I was supposed to be studying while her kids were sleeping and then sleeping myself. But I ended up just reading page after page of these anatomy and physiology books. And I thought, this is just so fascinating. And I became very obsessed with the body and how it works. And so I said, I think I would be really good at this. And so I left that school and moved back home and ended up living back with my mom, who's a single mom, and went to the local junior college here in town and got my nursing degree. Yeah.
Awesome. Awesome. Good for you.
Yeah.
And tell us, so remind us, so you're practicing in the intensive care unit, I believe, right now, and you've practiced in, multiple environments. Tell us a little bit about your areas of expertise.
Yeah. So I started off in oncology, which is a great unit as a new nurse. They were very welcoming and some great teachers on that unit. And I was there for 4 years. And then I just got a little restless. I didn't want to quite become chemotherapy certified. I was having babies and constantly breastfeeding or giving birth. I had 3 children. So I felt, I don't know, I was nervous about being around chemo at that time, even though with the safety, PPE. But
Okay.
so I took a new leap and I went to the emergency department. Was not my favorite. I did not enjoy the chaos of a busy ER department and then not knowing what happened to the patient afterwards.
Yeah.
It didn't sit with me well,
Yeah.
and I'm kind of detail oriented, so that was not the department for me.
Mhm.
So I was there for a year and a half, and then I got hired into the PRN department, which is a department here in our hospital in Sonoma County, which is stands for Procedure and Resource Nurse. And you basically walk all over the hospital and you help out in every department. You don't take a patient assignment, but you do a lot of tasks and help the nurses out. And so I did that, and I got PIC trained. We do a lot of ultrasound IVs, and I did that for 9 years. And it's a great job because you really get to know everybody in the hospital. It's a very thankful position. They're very grateful for you all the time. So no lack of hearing thank you in that role. But after 9 years, I just wanted to learn something new. I kind of felt like I was at the top of that field and wanted to expand my knowledge. So I took a job in critical care. Definitely no lack of learning in that department. So I've been there for 6 years.
Wow, that's pretty amazing. It reminds me, and all the nurses will be able to probably relate to this, and the non-nurses, what they're likely going to be hearing after hearing you just share this is how many different opportunities our profession offers us.
For sure.
And be able to practice in all those yet different environment, but our onboarding, our training, our education really allowing us to be able to assist in all those
Mhm.
various settings. But
Yeah.
at the same time, the effort that it requires to engage and to be and you have to learn new stuff, new ways of doing things every different place where you go. So that requires a special a lot of thinking, right before you move into, from one site of care to the other. So good for you. Good for you. You know, I really want to dive into something that you and I had a chat recently about, and it's the current environment in which we are in. A colleague of mine recently labeled the last 2 years as the special kind of hell,
Mhm.
and I it really resonates with me. The way she calls it, because as much as because of what we're trying to do,
Mhm.
there we always want to lean in, and we certainly it certainly has been an opportunity for us to show up as nurses and care for all the communities that we serve. And at the same time, my own words here, but it's probably been a little bit more than you and I even thought we were signing up to do, to a certain extent, right? It's been an interesting 2 years. There's no doubt about that. H- how would you even begin to describe how it's been the last 2 years, for our profession, and for you more specifically?
Yeah. The first word that comes to my mind describing the last 2 years would be emotionally draining.
Mhm.
I guess it's two words. So emotionally draining would be my first thought in describing it if I had to sum it up. And like I said, I've been a nurse for 21 years. This has definitely been the most challenging 2 years of my entire nursing career. And as I said, I've been in many different departments and I've experienced different types of nursing, including emergency, which can be very
Mhm,
challenging. But critical care nursing the last 2 years,
mhm,
I mean, I've been in critical care for 6 years, and critical care nurses are not immune to challenging situations.
mhm,
We deal with end of life, we deal with trauma patients of all ages. It can be very exhausting emotionally working in the critical care unit just outside the pandemic. And then you bring the pandemic into it. And I do have to say that before the, before the pandemic, there was a problem with being short staffed already. We already had a nursing crisis in America, really nationwide. And our unit in particular already was short staffed. We also had challenges in our hospital with just kind of the revolving door administrations and feeling um, tied in or connected to administration. So there was that struggle as well because we had some, a pretty high turnover rate at that point. And then also nationwide and locally, and in my experience, more and more expectations are being put on the nurses to do more work in the same amount of time. So that was already in place. And then the pandemic came along and it brought more challenges. So we were finding that we were constantly understaffed again to the point where we were critically understaffed and we were receiving pages after pages after pages or text after text saying that they were in critical shortage and critical crisis and they needed nurses. And so then many of us felt the burden of being there for our coworkers and filling that need. And so we would work extra shifts and we'd pick up extra shifts. And eventually that definitely takes a toll. Some of my coworkers also had nurse exemptions, so they didn't have to take care of COVID patients, which that then brought on a new burden to the other nurses who were repeatedly taking COVID patients in our unit. And so that brought about more strain emotionally. As you know, the COVID patients are not easy to take care of during that time. They were in isolation. We had to put on the PPE, we had to wear the helmets and the gown and the masks. And there was concern over that. It takes time to do that every time you go into a room. And if you had 2 COVID patients, imagine taking that 10 minutes every time to put on all your protective gear before you even go into the room. And if the patient was in crisis at that moment, that brings about a whole new stress of getting into the room quickly, but also keeping yourself safe. So, that was definitely a period of time, especially in the beginning. Things were changing constantly. The CDC recommendations, the hospitals were trying to make the best decisions they could, but not really knowing exactly what to do and trying to make the best decision they could with what they had to work with, including reusing PPE, which that brought about a whole new stress. Are we going to bring this home to our families? Are we going to infect our kids? So all that to say, that was a whole new level of stress for especially critical care nurses. That's what I can speak of because that's the role that I'm in. I can definitely say that the volume of end of life patients went through the roof. I mean, typically I can say in my experience, I might have a patient that I transition to comfort care in the ICU maybe once every 4 to 6 weeks. I would say during this pandemic, there was a week last summer where we put 13 people into body bags in 1 week, just in the COVID area alone. And that takes a lot out of you. Especially not having families at the bedside. We as nurses had to step in and be that family member for the patient. We had to step in and hold their hands and be present with them as they died. And I'm getting a little choked up when I talk about it, but having the family not at the bedside was huge because family take a piece of that burden off of the nurse. They're present for that loved one. And when they're not there, we felt the need to stand in the gap. And the family still wanted to be present through FaceTime or Zoom. And I remember in the beginning, we had so many problems getting connected over FaceTime and Zoom and getting like a hospital login. And it seemed to take months. So oftentimes we would use our own personal cell phones to do that. And there are times where, you would literally set these things up on FaceTime and their loved ones would watch their family member pass away over the computer, over FaceTime, over Zoom. While you're holding their hand, you're stroking their head, their forehead, just to be of some comfort to the family. Multiple family members could have been on the FaceTime or the Zoom. I remember at one point I had 21 on a Zoom call, and they were all taking turns saying how wonderful their loved one was and how much they were going to miss them and how much they wanted to see them and touch them. Some would take turns singing over them, praying over them, reciting hymns. I remember a grandson grabbed his guitar and sang to his grandpa. It's hard. It's hard being at the bedside watching that, knowing that they can't be with their loved one. And, you have tears coming down your eyes inside your PAPR helmet. The PAPR helmet is blowing cool air on your face. So then you're chilling because your tears are running down your face and pooling inside your helmet. It's just a surreal experience. And this went on for months.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't know. Maybe I said too much in that period of time.
No, it's all good. No. I mean, it's a lot has happened in the last 2 years. It's almost a bit unfair to even think that we can even address this question in such a little amount of time. But I appreciate you sharing your personal experience because it definitely draws a picture into what it was for you. And a crisis. In fact, I would say that most crises teach us something about ourselves. When you think back over the last 2 years, Anything in particular this crisis may have offered you, or something that you may have learned about yourself that you you weren't quite so aware of before, and anything you'd like to share?
Um, I think the thing I learned the most about myself was that I need connection,
Mm,
that I can't do life alone. And I'm a pretty independent person. I think most nurses are. We have to learn to be autonomous, to critically think, to learn from what we've been taught. I was raised by a single mom
mm,
most of my, all my life. And she's pretty strong and independent. And I think of myself as that
mhm,
way.
mhm,
But I could not have gone through this alone. And I'm concerned about the people that did. Um, I did notice that with me coming home and after going through all that I just shared, I mean, I think us as nurses, we learned to definitely we're really good at being a team. We're really good at supporting each other at work. And I mean, I give kudos to the nurses in my department because I love our teamwork. It's what keeps us together. I think it's what keeps a lot of us still employed in the same department together is that we have camaraderie and we rely on that with each other. And during the time where, we didn't really have everything under our control, we really focused on what we could control, and that was our patient comfort.
mhm,
We could do that.
mhm,
We could flip a pillow to the other side and make it cool for the patient's head. We could position them in a way that we thought was the most comfortable. We could give medications to make them more comfortable. Those are things that we could control, and that's what I think we focused on. As far as myself, I found that I needed to take better care of myself during that time. In the
mhm,
beginning, I really wasn't. I was exhausted emotionally. I would come home, I have 3 kids, I had demands at home. I felt like I had nothing else to give, and I became a lot more irritable at home, and my
mhm,
family would call me out on it.
mhm.
I was annoyed at the little things, the noises at home, the little messes would annoy me more, and I'm a little OCD, and I wouldn't diagnose myself that way, but you like having things in a neat fashion all the time. So, when I came home and I was emotionally exhausted, it definitely transitioned to being more annoyed, more irritable at home, and my family would call me out on it. And finally, I really took heed to that, and I had to increase my self-care in a way that I wasn't really I was kind of neglecting it. I used to
Mm,
work out a lot. I didn't have the drive to do that anymore. I was so tired from being at work and the emotions and the physical strain. I didn't wanna do it. I just wanted to come home and veg. But I wasn't allowed to do that because I had kids and I had a husband who needed me and I had cooking and laundry and, anyways, they're helpful, but, I just found that, I really had to hone in on that, and so I started going on walks with my dog, or my family. I started getting outside more. I like to hike.
mhm,
Um, I liked the ocean. I love
mhm,
the sounds of the waves. It's very
mhm.
healing to me,
Uh-huh.
and so we would just take a drive, and we'd go to the ocean and just sit there for hours, and that was my veg. That was how I vegged, at the ocean or, going for a hike. I mean, just literally a breath of fresh air and medicine for my soul. I had to do that. I had to shut off the news.
Yeah.
I had to. We heard so much of it at work. We talked about it all the time, all day, and then to come home and talk about it again, it wasn't healthy for me. It
Yeah.
was negative. So I had to really hone in on positive things in my life. Um, but that connection for me was huge. I am a Christian, so our church had online services, and connecting through that was huge for me while we were isolated. Um, so just those things of finding positivity outside
Mhm,
of work was
mhm,
just valuable.
mhm.
I had to connect with my family. I needed them,
Yeah.
even, my not just my immediate family in my home, but
Mhm.
mom lives next door. And then my husband's family lives in town. We kept that connection up. I had to have it
Yeah.
because I could not just isolate myself
Yeah.
found it much too depressing.
Yeah.
And when you're alone with your thoughts too much and you dwell on those things of the day that are challenging, it's just not healthy.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I appreciate that. You said a few things that everything you said really resonates with me. And one thing I'd like to underscore is you were talking about, going to the beach and, checking out, and you're talking about, not listening to the news, like, tuning it down. And I can so relate with you on that. It became noise more than anything else. And what drove me crazy was that all of a sudden, number one, everybody has an opinion. Not that I
Mhm.
need to hear your opinion, but everyone had an opinion.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, the whole world has these degrees in infectious disease and medicine, and right? It's like, where are these people coming from?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
just couldn't believe it.
I know. I had the same experience.
And unfortunately, that kind of sort of hasn't stopped yet. I don't know,
Yeah,
but those opinionated folks figure out a way to find a platform, and
for sure.
there's certainly my perspective, my own words here,
Mhm.
annoying the heck out of me.
Yeah.
In the midst of all that, you highlighted for us what the crisis has taught you, and how you've figured out a way to deal with it. And from my vantage point, at the same time, considering the enormous amount of stress and unknown and intensity and all of what you and your team had to go through, care was delivered, lives were saved. I mean, the list goes on. What are you the most proud of, like right now, as you're, in this moment?
Um, I would say through all this, I recognized that a lot of my coworkers were struggling. I've lost a lot of really good coworkers who have left for lower stressful, less stressful jobs.
Sure.
Um, and I wanted to bring about something that would bring some positivity in nursing. It just seemed like there was so much struggling. And so I started a website. um, and it's not for my benefit. It's just for nurses. And
Hmm.
I really, Maya Angelou, who I really
Hmm.
respect, said there's no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside of you. And I really resonate in that. And I started writing out my experiences and what I was going through. And I tried to encourage a lot of my coworkers to do that. I find that that's a very healing process. And then not only just to write it out, but to share it with people, because then you're not alone and you're not feeling the same feelings alone, and others are going through the same thing and they're working through that as well. And so I started a website that I was hoping that that nurses would take the time to share their story of what it's been like for them. I shared a piece of mine. Another coworker had shared hers. I put those on there. There's resources on how to do better self-care in your life, bring about better self-care. There's resources on moral distress, things like compassion fatigue and all these phrases that we're hearing more about, which is great. There's a lot of education out there right now on that. Burnout. I mean, it's a real issue amongst nursing right now. And so I just wanted a place to provide support in those things. Just especially with the new nurses that are coming up through the nursing schools and are being educated right now. I just really wanted to shed some light on that there is hope and there is resources that we can look to help teach us how to work better through these things. God
Hmm.
forbid things don't get better in the future,
Yeah.
or we go through what we have already again.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm proud of that. I just started it. I have been working on it for a while. I just started it, and I'm really hoping that nurses will use that to their benefit to share their story and to read others and learn from those stories.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Good for you. Good for you. I'm hearing you sharing some very important tools that one could use. One, I'm hearing you say, tell the story,
Hmm.
tell your story.
Yeah.
Don't keep that, don't keep that inside. So I'm hearing you reminding us of that. And then I'm hearing you reminding us that journaling and reflective practice, two very important tools to assist us in our
Mhm.
well-being, particularly as we're going through this most longest trauma
Mhm.
ever experienced, at least for our generation. That's for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah, for sure. I there's so much we could talk about moral distress or
Hmm.
compassion fatigue or burnout.
Hmm.
But it's a real thing, and I've just seen some really excellent nurses that I've worked with, leave, and I really wonder if there had been a little bit better education on that,
Hmm.
more discussion about that, more emphasis on, you know, talking about it, like you said, just having that dialogue, just peer to peer. It's so
Yeah.
valuable. We know what it's been like for each other. We've walked in those shoes, and so we can definitely relate with one another listening to those stories. And I just don't think a lot of nurses talk about it enough. And when
Yeah.
you look at it like online and you try to research, like what is a nurses going through this, and there's not a lot of talk out there. And I think that nurses are strong. Nurses are strong people. I mean, we deal with situations that a lot of the public have no idea what it's like to be
Yeah.
in that situation.
Yeah.
um, not just through COVID, but with, drug addicts or, just very difficult diseases and infections and traumas, car accidents and all different ages, and you deal with their families. And all of that is something that you can definitely learn through over time on how to improve in that area. But I definitely think there's a lack of education out there on how to deal with those situations. And I really hope that in the future things improve with education as far as teaching nurses how to deal with end of life care or challenging unsafe situations.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
hoping that that is going to improve, or even dealing with the stresses of
Yeah.
burnout. Uh,
Yeah.
Alarm fatigue. As critical care nurses, we hear
Yeah.
alarm all the time, and there's a
Yeah.
lot of information out there on that. But, I think that things are definitely improving, but we definitely could do more with education in that area.
Hmm. Well, one thing that I'm hearing you say is, yeah, we're nurses. Yes, we're trained to manage all of these things individually. But the difference in what happened here in the last 2 years is that it was that and then some on steroids, right?
Mhm.
So all of it all together, all at once, and that's a lot for anyone to take, right?
It is a lot, yeah. And the fact that, you're emotionally drained, you're exhausted. There are times, I mean, we're just, they coined us as heroes, and we're not. I don't like that term because I
Yeah.
just think we're doing what we are trained to do.
Yeah.
But we go home feeling defeated, feeling guilty. I mean, are we doing enough? Could we have done more for our patients? Are we going to bring it home? They're all normal feelings.
Yeah.
It's not, doesn't
Yeah.
make us heroes. It just makes us, that's our job and we were trained to do it. But
Yeah.
we still go home feeling, could we have done more?
Yeah.
You Did
Yeah.
we do enough?
Yeah. 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 I could see that.
Mhm.
It's likely, I don't know, but it's likely that the last 2 years are probably going to haunt us for a long time. We don't probably don't even know yet, maybe the long-term impact that this may have on some of us, our profession, and healthcare worker in general. We're focusing on the practice of nursing here on this particular talk, and we certainly recognize that there is an entire team that we work with very closely that is also, dealing with pretty significant practice gaps, and the likes. What's keeping you up at night, like right now? Something that you'd like to share with us that we ought to, consider and kind of lean in.
Um, it's a bit of a funny question because nothing keeps me up at night.
Well, you and I both, by the way.
I know what you mean. I'm a very good sleeper. And once I'm horizontal, I'm out. So you could ask any of my family or friends.
And that is a gift and a blessing, quite frankly, because
It is.
sometimes
It is.
I have the same answer when somebody asks me that question, and you go like, "Wow, lucky you." I'm like, "Oh, sorry."
I know. It is a blessing, and I definitely count that as a blessing. But if you mean what weighs heavy on my heart right now, I can definitely answer that. Okay. So, I just think what weighs the heaviest is how I can best support my coworkers. I don't want to see people leave the bedside. There is a mass exodus. We already have a shortage. Retention is a huge thing that needs to be focused on. And I think just how I can best support them. And the only way I can think of how to support them, I mean, I did start that website that I mentioned, but I think in being present while I'm at work is being positive. I think that I am a pretty positive person. I mean, there are a lot of negatives in healthcare as well, but I try not to focus on them. But just how can I best be an example in my current work, my workplace environment, on how to foster a love of nursing again? I don't think that's there right now, that love of nursing. um, and I think the best way to do it is just to be that example at work, to be positive, to encourage my coworkers.
Mhm,
And like I said, I just wanted to do something for nurses nationwide. And I'm
mhm.
hoping that nurses will just find that voice where they can share instead of pushing down what they've experienced, and keeping that in.
Staying positive reminds me of the importance of practicing gratitude.
Yes.
And there's a lot written about the impact and the and the positive influence that practicing gratitude. So it's one thing to say it, and it's another thing to practice it every day. I've got a chance to chat with some colleagues, and also learn from folks who really do this like every day, like, and it's part of their ongoing routine. And the more I was listening to them, the more I realized that I recognize the importance of gratitude.
Mhm.
But 2 years ago, um, I was not being deliberate about practicing it every day, and that is one thing
Yeah.
that I have changed, and it does make a heck of a lot of difference. So I can only imagine, by you going to work every day, and so number one, you and I choose to go wherever we go to practice. So that's a choice in it by itself, to a
Mhm.
certain extent, particularly in nursing. I would say
Mhm.
it's definitely a choice.
For sure.
And then
Mhm.
when we show up there, what I'm hearing you say is showing up with the intent,
Mhm.
and being very deliberate about demonstrating, gratitude, positivity, does make a difference.
Mhm. Mhm. And I agree. I could improve that area in my life for sure, practicing gratitude. Um, I did try to focus on that a bit. I read some books by Brene Brown, during this period.
Hmm,
Who I
hmm.
absolutely love her books. Um, but I do think, one of her messages is that courage starts with showing up and letting ourselves being seen.
Yes.
Letting ourselves be seen, but that's a vulnerable place, where you have to be honest with those around you about what you're going through and what you're feeling. Um, but something that did definitely helped me during this time, and I would encourage all nurses, is just to make sure that you make time to separate yourself from the demands of work. I mean, I can be texts 1, 2, 3 times a day that they're short staffed and then I need to go
Yeah.
in. But my husband and I and my family, we would take time to like go on a vacation. And though
Yeah.
vacations were limited because of isolate, we would go camping,
Yeah.
and just being able to separate yourself from that, like I can't come in because I'm not there. Then
Hmm.
I could let that guilt go.
Yeah. Yeah.
But if I
Yeah.
was home and I would receive that, then I would feel more of a burden to go in and help my coworkers.
Yeah.
And so I just would really encourage everybody to make sure that you focus on taking time just to separate yourself from the demands so that you can feel relief from the guilt of not being there, when things are demanding.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate you mentioning the work that of Brene Brown, and particularly want to highlight what you shared with us. The importance of showing with vulnerability,
Mhm.
and how that vulnerability really allows us to really stay with to really get at the core of whatever it is that's going on right now. It's also about right, showing vulnerability in the moment, uh, being fully present. And when you do that, that's when you recognize, and that's when you feel, that's when you start to feel whatever
Yeah.
it is that you need to feel, that you're feeling in the moment. But I also recognize that as nurses, and regardless of the role that we have in the organization, that there's some accountability and responsibility. It starts with us, right? It starts with making sure that we're taking care of ourselves, and we also are very good about taking care of each other.
Mhm.
And the best way of taking care of each other in this instance is really by creating the space to have the conversations. And
Yeah.
sometimes it's by showing our own vulnerability that we're demonstrating to others that it's okay to be
Mhm.
vulnerable. And then all of a sudden, it's the gift that keeps on giving, I guess.
Mhm. It doesn't mean that it's easy, though.
No,
It's
no.
definitely not easy. I
In
remember
fact,
a patient that was in our COVID unit on Christmas Day, and the family couldn't get there in time before he
mm,
passed away, and I went into the room. This was last year. I was working Christmas Day and just sat next to him and held his hand, and I sang Christmas carols.
mm,
But while doing it, I felt so much compassion and just concern for him being alone that I mean, I was weeping. I was weeping and I was embarrassed because my coworkers that came to the window and they heard me singing. I didn't know that. And then they start crying and I'm crying. And it was embarrassing for me because I didn't realize that I had an audience. Secondly, we all just shared, it brought about this beautiful moment really of vulnerability where we all just let our guard down. And that saying, you feel the feels, we just let ourselves feel the emotion of that really sorrowful moment where the patient was by himself on a Christmas day, I mean, without family. But I think through that, it was almost healing, just seeing each other let our guard down and feel those emotions, and seeing other nurses going through that at the same time. I just think we always keep the shell up where we don't allow
mm.
our true emotions to show. And even though it was an embarrassing moment for me, it later became, I think, a very healing moment where I connected with a couple of my coworkers at that moment. Um, so that's just part of that, letting yourself be seen.
Yeah, you bet. Well, I'm super thankful for you, and for you for taking the time to share the example that you just shared. Because what you also did in this moment right now is you demonstrated what it's like to show vulnerability, right? You articulated, for us what a vulnerable moment is, which is sharing a moment where you felt where you felt you weren't at you didn't think you were at your best because you were singing, but it was not about the singing. It certainly was not whether you were in tune or not, but
Mhm.
man, were you present with your patient. And I mean, there's no better sign of compassion than what you just described there. And that's pretty amazing. That's pretty amazing. I would I would guess that that's uh, likely what feeds you and what allows you to keep on going back.
Hmm. I have pretty good support at home too. My husband is a licensed marriage and family therapist, and he specializes in trauma therapy.
There, now it all makes sense, right? Now it all makes sense. Well, and good for you for taking all that, those that learning, and quite frankly sharing with others how you feel supported and what it's like to be supported. And you could have chosen to keep that support for yourself and not necessarily sharing it through a website, for example, or not sharing it at work. So I appreciate you you carrying it forward. That's really that's really good of you. You know what? I'm tempted to ask you, when you think about, there might be some folks on the call today that are listening in. We might have some nurse leaders that might be listening in. Um, what what's your word of advice to nurse leaders today on that? Where does the focus need to be in 2022?
That's a really loaded question. First of all, I would say that I cannot imagine being a nurse manager in administration these days. I mean, that is a hard job. Getting, basically flack from both sides. The people who work for you, being that middleman, I just think that would be so challenging these days. But I definitely think there needs to be more support with education with the newer nurses coming up. Um, as far as providing end of life care, more teaching on. I mean, you really aren't taught that in nursing school. So providing end of life care can be very challenging. Um, and I think there needs to be more focus on peer to peer support. I would love to see some more peer to peer support teams built within hospitals so that nurses can go to nurses that have been trained in that area and let themselves be seen and be vulnerable and talk about what they're feeling. Obviously, the first thing that comes to mind when I think of what nurse leaders should focus on is retention. But I definitely think that's something that we're struggling on a local level as well as nationwide. I'm not sure what the perfect answer to that is, but there definitely needs to be a focus on retaining the bedside staff. It's so easy for staff these days to leave and do travel nursing to make a lot of money and not have to, it takes away the stresses of doing health streams at every hospital or having a manager. And nurses can easily travel right now, make a lot of money, and not have um, the ancillary stuff that you have to do at work that's required. So I would just hate to keep losing really good staff. So I just think that there needs to be definitely a focus on retention. So education, providing support and self-care would be another one. And a lot of hospitals do offer some things, but maybe focusing on nutritious food for staff. I know some hospitals offer fitness for their staff. That would be fantastic. Just having the ability to go to a gym, maybe on site, or paying for a gym membership. Those kind of things. Just offering more support and self care, I think, would be another area that could be looked at. Um, and then I would just say, just from different meetings I've sat in, just really listening to the staff needs um, instead of just responding to respond, but listening to what they're asking for and trying to connect with them. I know there's a lot of staff on my department that probably don't know who the administration is right now. Um, a lot a lot of that is because they're new, and a lot of that is because they're just not seen. And I think being present on the units is huge. Allowing yourselves as administrators and leaders to be seen and trying to connect with the employees goes a long way. And I definitely would encourage leaders to look at that.
All amazing advice. Presence, visibility, listening. I also, and you also reminded us that, when we listen intently, it really allows, now my own words that I'm adding to that, that really allows us to respond as opposed to react.
Right.
And I think that there's a pretty important distinction between the two, and it's important to stay focused on that. And I would agree, so I agree with you with all of what you said. Great advices, and I appreciate the reminder in the advices on retention, 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 retention. Yes, it's a
Yeah.
new game. It's a whole different world out there. You said it. We're not quite sure exactly 100% what that means anymore. However, we do know that by showing up with gratitude, with presence, with empathy, with compassion, and listening, it's certainly a good starting point to help with retention.
Yeah.
Chandra, I cannot help thank you enough
Mhm.
for spending the time with me today, and but most importantly, thank you for choosing to practice as a nurse. You do so much good. You've saved so much lives, and you have also helped so many people along the way who have suffered, but somehow. Through your healing and your compassion, help them transition wherever it is that whether they transition into a different level of care or whether they passed. But to know that we have Chandria out there working in one of our intensive care unit makes me super grateful, and I wish you the best of holidays. Hopefully, you'll
You.
get to spend some time with your family and your children.
Yeah.
And to everyone out there, I want to say thank you so much for listening in. And don't be afraid to send in your questions. And to learn more about our initiatives, our programs or services, and ways to give, please visit providence.org. Thank you so much. And make sure that you follow up on Providence on Twitter and at Providence Health System on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Syl.